Denial is something that a lot of people with mental illness have experienced, and it can be very damaging, and when it is faced and overcome, it can lead to huge improvements in our life and even in our experience of our mental illness. In this video, I'm going to unpick denial, I'm going to define it, I'm going to share my own journey with denial, I'm going to really kind of dive into it and then talk about how we get over denial, how we face our illness and deal with it in a positive, sort of responsible way. So here we go. When I had my first manic episode, age 17, and I'd gone completely mad, I was put in a mental hospital and stayed there for 2 months before coming out, not really being well for a long time, and facing this enormous kind of shock that bipolar delivered to me. I fairly quickly went into denial. And I see that there's sort of two subsections to that there's partial denial and there's total denial. Now, regarding mental illness, total denial would be completely denying that there was really anything wrong with myself at all. I would say that I didn't really have bipolar episodes. I just, had a tough time and got a bit emotional. I wouldn't take medication or seek any treatments for bipolar. I would just kind of put my head down and plow on with life. And partial denial would be sort of almost admitting to oneself that yes, I've had a bipolar episode, but I've got the whole thing sorted out. It's not affecting me. I don't need to learn about this illness. To be quite honest, I'm just going to get on with life and everything will be fine. And the biggest problem with denial is that it's making up our own narrative of reality. Imagine deciding that gravity didn't exist. Just thinking, you know what, I know that things fall out of trees and people fall over, but gravity doesn't exist. And that's really what denial is. It's looking at the reality of life and just dismissing it and putting our own narrative on it. Now, when I say it like that, you can kind of see how ridiculous it can be, and yet it's something that so many of us experience at different times in our life. And the main reason why we experience it is because it's unconscious. We're generally not conscious when we're in denial. It's almost like, perhaps through fear or perhaps through the desire to protect ourselves from consequences we're afraid of, we just close the door on a situation and we just get on with life. And that's what I did with bipolar for 20 years. This is, to many people, one of the most disturbing parts of denial, is that when we are in denial, we don't realise it. That's kind of the whole point of denial. For me, it was partial denial because I took my medication every night and I had no problems telling people I had bipolar if they were interested or if they needed to know. But as far as actually investigating the illness, reading about it, finding ways to live better with it, just generally knowing thy enemy, that would be a way you could say it, I had no interest in that whatsoever. I got diagnosed with bipolar in 1993, so there was very little obvious support or psychotherapy or peer groups. The internet wasn't around. There wasn't a lot of talking about these things, so I wasn't really offered the chance to sort of sit down and really address what had happened to me and try to come to terms with it. So instead, I sort of fairly quickly just hopped into denial. I got myself this amazing job in London and New York as a sales trader, completely inappropriate for someone struggling with bipolar and struggling with medication. But, I had ambitions, I wanted to live my life, and so I cracked on with that. And this is one of the few benefits that I could sort of find with denial, and you may or may not think it's a benefit, but one of the small benefits was that because I didn't take bipolar seriously, and because I literally thought I could just do exactly what I was doing before bipolar, I lived my life that way. And I didn't see myself as broken. I saw myself as someone who could achieve and make a difference in life. And that was a benefit, particularly as a young man, to feel that I was empowered. I think it would have been very bad for me if I had actually really appreciated just how serious bipolar can be, and that my life could be very, very different, and then taken that too much to heart and kind of covered myself in cotton wool and not taken any risks, not taken any decisions, and become someone who heavily identified with being broken. That wouldn't have been good. But when it comes to the damage that denial can do, I didn't do anything to support my life with bipolar. I didn't eat well, I drank, I smoked, I went to lots of parties, had lots of fun, lots of adventures. I took more and more risks. I didn't talk to anyone who knew about bipolar, really after I'd sort of dealt with my psychiatrist in the first couple of years. I didn't read about it. I didn't do anything to educate myself. In denial, we make a lot of excuses for things. We maybe dismiss our moodiness as just, it's just my personality, or I'm quite stressed at the moment, or my friends are just imagining it. We tend not to be very open to what people have to say to us, and so often we don't even create opportunities for people to say things to us, because our friends know that if they start talking to us about the way we're behaving, we might get aggressive, or we might be reactive, or we might end the friendship, and they just think, it's just not worth it. And this is one of the biggest dangers of denial. It's that when we're in denial, we start to really do life on our own. We sort of cut other people out. And generally speaking, it's not good to do life on your own. It is good to include other people and to get help when we need it, and to share this journey with other people. But particularly with bipolar, living as though we're an island, kind of solely responsible for ourselves and sort of trudging through, it's just not a good way to do it. Due to my denial of bipolar, I tried to come off medication twice and ended up extremely depressed, in mental hospitals 2 different times, having ruined relationships, spent far too much money. I spent 20 years without being able to even think of having a career. I went through a lot of suffering because of denial. Had I somehow magically been able to accept bipolar, for example, when I was at university, or afterwards when I was working at Merrill Lynch, then my experiences of the two would have been very different. For example, at university, I would have gone to see a psychiatrist or a doctor quite regularly, and I would have talked to them about my life and what was happening, and seen what they thought, if they had any ideas. I would have had some kind of safety net, instead of just kind of living a bit like a wild man for 3 years. And as far as working at Merrill Lynch was concerned, they could have been a huge help. They could have perhaps got me work that didn't have such long hours, that wasn't so high pressure. They could have taken into account my bipolar, but I didn't even tell them. It wasn't something that I ever thought about, and the idea of an employer actually being able to help me hadn't even occurred to me. And ironically, Merrill Lynch was a pretty forward-thinking company in many ways, and they had a huge human resources department, and I think if I'd spoken to them, they would have actually done a lot of good for me. If you're interested in getting a monthly email from me with a couple of videos that I've made on it, then please go to my website, www.oliverseligman.com. You'll be able to put in your name and your email address and submit it, and then you'll start getting monthly emails from me, which you can easily unsubscribe from, and I won't use your emails for anything else. The one thing that finally helped me deal with denial was the amount of suffering that I'd experienced. I think for some of us, life just needs to push us and push us and push us until we finally realise this isn't working. this is a disaster. I've ruined too many friendships. I've got too little money. My life is a mess. And it's almost like in that sort of deep well of suffering that we suddenly realise, I've got to do something different. And for me, what I realised was, I've got a serious mental illness and I've actually got to start dealing with it. I've actually got to start making decisions that support me and make my life better. And that made such a difference. And it happened one morning. I woke up, I walked out into our living room, my wife was sitting there, and I just started chuckling to myself. And this was after sort of a few years of trying to come off medication and a lot of suffering and not a lot of laughter. And my wife looked at me and she said, "Why are you laughing?" And I said to her, "I've just realised I can accept this illness and I've got to start dealing with it. Something has landed in me that is going to allow me to deal with this." And it was an incredible turning point for me. A few days later, I was offered a part-time job from a school that I had worked for 6 years earlier. They just phoned me up randomly. I got access to better treatment, and one thing led to the other, and my life and my relationship with bipolar just improved and improved. So now I want to talk about some of the things that may help you with acceptance if there are any parts of your life that you're sort of in denial of. I think the first one would be to try to create open and honest relationships with your friends and family members if you can. Relationships where people feel they can tell you the tough stuff and that you won't react badly or stop the friendship, but you're actually genuinely interested in getting feedback from the people who are close to you. This is particularly important for people with bipolar because sometimes we lose our ability to judge. We lose our ability to step back from ourselves and look at situations. And so, a bit of trust in our friends and family, and even perhaps talking to them and saying, "Look, if I get a bit strange, or if you think I'm going a bit manic, or if you think I'm doing strange things in my life, I'd really appreciate it if you would tell me about it, because that's when I really need your friendship. And if I react badly, if I get annoyed, then, well, that's kind of my problem. That's on me." And the second thing that's very useful is to have a certain amount of humility and openness. If we feel prideful about always knowing what's what and knowing how to do life, we need to let that go. And we need to be someone who's much more curious about life and interested in learning and interested in getting feedback from other people. It's good to be honest with ourselves. It's good to self-reflect, to not always just assume that we need to just plough on with life. Then I would certainly step back and look and say, well, am I contributing to this? Am I a bit manic or hypermanic? Am I being very dismissive or very judgmental? And that's sort of just stepping back, and that honesty, it might help me. It might make me see, I do actually need to sort out some of these problems, or no, I don't think so. I think this is just the nature of those relationships. And this connects with my next point, which would be looking more to ourselves and putting more responsibility on ourselves when we're well. I'm not talking about when we're in an episode, because we can't really do that, but looking to ourselves as the sort of creator of our world more than blaming others for what we think they do is wrong. This is a pretty obvious shift, but it's also a huge shift. Someone who naturally blames other people and blames the world for their problems is a victim, and they believe they're a victim. And when we believe we're a victim, our life really isn't that great, because we are completely susceptible to everything that the world does. If something goes wrong, well, it had nothing to do with us. We're victims, and that's not a good way to be. But if we start to take more responsibility on ourselves and to ask ourselves, how have I contributed to this situation, then that can be extremely helpful. I think the last point in this section that I would say is that denial is completely understandable. It's a very, very natural reaction, and generally speaking, it comes from fear. Someone who's in denial can look very arrogant because they're kind of closed and they at least pretending they know what's best. But really underneath it, I think there's usually a fear of really taking a step back and looking at a situation because they're afraid of what they might find. Life after denial. Well, I can honestly say that life after denial has been an awful lot better. It would be easy to regret those 20 years and regret those lost years that they were lost years, a lot of those years that I experienced, and there's a lot of suffering. But I don't see it that way, because I do see life as being an opportunity to learn and to grow and to mature and expand as a human being. And had I not gone through those experiences, I don't think I would be the person I am now. So again, it's not this kind of sort of toxic positivity of, oh, everything that happened was wonderful. I don't think that at all. I think a lot of it was really terrible, but I don't dwell on it and I don't sort of consciously regret it. And that allows me to move forward with living now. It's also made me much more resilient and open to life. I'm much less hard on myself. You know, I'm able to laugh at my mistakes and I'm able to realise, look, I'm a human being, we all make mistakes, and that I don't need to be perfect, which is wonderful. It's also, funnily enough, given me more confidence. So when one is closely connected to reality and not trying to sort of deny it or hide from it, one does have more confidence because one is stronger and one is more sort of sure of how one feels about a situation and what we feel is the right thing to do, because we're not excluding a significant part of our psyche, which we're doing in denial. We're pushing away an enormous amount of reality. And when we embrace reality, our confidence grows. So thanks very much for listening to this. If you want to hear more videos, I've done one on acceptance, and here it is. Have a great day.